we go. We are live. So, guys, thank you so much for joining me today. Anytime as an author you get to talk about your book, it is a special opportunity. To get to do that with people who have not read, one book, but 2 books, 3 books, that's special. So I really appreciate you being here. I appreciate you have taken the time to have read A Vengeful Realm, and you've enjoyed it enough to join me here today. So I want to say a very special thank you, very heartfelt thank you. This has been a story that I've been working on for 10 years. It's been a huge part of my life. These characters have been like a huge part of my life, and to get the opportunity to share that with you is very special to me. So without further ado, we're going to jump in. I've collected a list of questions from some people who couldn't be joining us today but wanted the recording thereafter. If you would like, at any point, feel free to jump in. Landon, if you are here and present and accounted for, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please do so.
Sure thing. So, like Tim said, my name is Landon Soelberg. I am the audiobook narrator for A Vengeful Realm, the series. I loved working on this project. Tim and I had our first conversation about A Vengeful Realm almost 2 years ago now. So I came in right after the first book was getting ready to be published. So I've had the immense opportunity of seeing the series kind of from behind the scenes, watching the series go out into the world, kind of in real time, which was really special. Tim is an incredible client. He's a good friend. He's a fantastic collaborator. We had long conversations about individual characters and about how he wanted them portrayed and how they were going to grow over time and how we could set up that growth early on. So ultimately, it was just an amazing experience, and Tim and I have become very good friends. I love what I do. I love being able to work with very creative and passionate people. I think that's my favorite part of my job is watching all anybody who's sat and listened to an author talk about their project can see just the light in their eyes and how passionate they get, and that's amazingly filling and inspiring for me. So I've loved working with Tim and bringing this all to life, and I hope that people enjoyed that particular rendition of his story. So, and I'm happy to be here today.
I enjoyed it. It was really well done.
And that's the thing. I feel like Landon, there's some narrators who read, you perform, and that performance, I think it adds another layer. Doing the audio was so important to me because that was what got me back into reading. So you brought to life the collaborative element. You brought to life what I couldn't have imagined, beyond my imagination. So my very heartfelt thank you. But with that said, anyone who wants to start out, you have questions about whether it's character arcs, the setting, the process, where it began, how it went down, some of the endings. Anyone have any questions? I have a couple listed out, so if no one has anything immediately, I'll just go straight in.
My question for Landon is, did you read everything first? And like, what is the whole process like for you? I mean, it, I've never had an opportunity to talk to somebody who's narrated a book before. Like, what is everything like for you by the time you got to, the epilogue at the end of book 3? What was going on in your head? Did you like the ending? How does it feel to then perform having this? I would imagine you do have some type of a relationship with these characters. So what is this all like for you?
Well, thank you. I think every narrator has their own process. Especially in the beginning, I don't like to read too far ahead. And for me, that is largely because I like the feeling that I get that I'm asking the same questions as the reader. There are moments. This is spoilers abound. That good stuff. Oh my
Yes, absolutely. I think everyone
internet, of course, is
here
going
has
down.
read.
Yes.
Okay. So I apologize, by the way, if my internet goes down. My internet provider and I are having lots of fun conversations recently. But so, for example, the very first conversation in book one between Thraina and Paxeron. I had not read to the end of the book, and we don't see much about Paxeron's real character until probably near the end of book two, if I'm remembering correctly, is when we start to realize, oh, this is not who Thraina thinks he is. So right out of the gate, I paused the recording and had to ask Tim. I was like, okay, Tim, obviously we're setting something up here. I don't want to create a whiplash for the audience, but I also don't want to give it away. So talk me through some. And so for some of those characters, if we were seeding things early on, I would sit with Tim and say, all right, walk me through this, because I want to know. I remember it became particularly important. I'm forgetting the context, but there's a scene in book one where Paxeron gets very angry at Rhaena,
Yes.
and I changed his voice because we had talked through, like, why is he calling himself Paxeron? Why are people calling him different things? And the idea was, oh, he's just pretending to be a different person. And so we added this element of, okay, well, what if we change his voice to when he's losing his cool, he kind of drops the facade, and then he calms himself down. He's like, okay, hold on, let's get back into character here. So for those moments, I ask Tim to walk me through it. But for the most part, I like the feeling that your narrator is asking the same questions. I heard something. What was that? Like, you're asking that as the listener. I'm asking that as the narrator. That all goes out the window near the end, because in all three of the books, I sit and I try and read through chapter once or twice before I record it. It helps me not stumble over words, even though I'm a habitual stumbler.
Me too.
One day I'll post
It comes out in the movie Magic Wash. So
yeah, I was about to say, I've had to learn how
The
to
power of
scrub.
editing.
I've had to scrub out a lot of stuff. One day I'll just post a raw chapter and you can see what it actually sounds like. But yeah, just like any reader, by the end of, I remember I read in one sitting the last like 80 pages of book one. I think I read the last 80. I know I read the last 80 or 90 pages of book three. I think I tried to hold myself back with book two, but I still reread the last 50 pages or so, just because I was so intrigued with Tim as a style. Once act three of his books start, he just sort of puts the pedal to the metal and it runs all the way to the end.
I was gonna say, it doesn't stop.
And I get caught up with that, just like any other reader. I was like, I need to know what's going on at the end of this book. So in that way, I'm very similar, I think, to the regular reader, where I love these characters. I feel like I'm a fan of this series, just as anybody else is. Your other question was, how did I feel about the ending? Tim and I have talked a lot about my thoughts on the ending. I think it's very, this word is thrown around a lot, but I found the ending to be very real. It was really hard for me. I'm a hopeless romantic at heart. It was really hard for me that not everybody ended up paired. I was always like, oh, who's Landon gonna fall in love with?
Yeah.
Because that's just how my brain works. And the fact that Zephyrus and Vicanalia don't end up together, really.
That hurt.
Like,
that hurt.
and I talked to him about that. I was like, I didn't like that, but it felt right. And we had discussions about, I think he seeded, just from a writing perspective, I think he seeded that very well. That was the whole, I mean, first or second chapter of book 3 is Vicanalia and Zephyrus being like, what are we going to do if this doesn't work out? And maybe it's growing up with hearing stories of romance in World War II or other stories like that, where it's like, sometimes it just doesn't work out. And in this particular instance, it wasn't because anybody did anything wrong. It just was how things played out. And I think everybody has experiences like that, or knows someone who has experiences like that, where, man, it would have been really great if, but that's not how it happened. And so it felt to me like Tim was able to portray that very well, which is hard because it could have easily come out as, or felt like he just pulled the rug out from his readers for the shock factor. It's like, oh, they're not going to end up together because my book isn't that way. No, it was just, it felt very real. Same thing with Layden and Thraina. We talked a lot, Tim and I, about, I don't think Layla and Thraina, or I don't think Layden and Thraina are in love in the end. They might fall in love later, but he was able to create such a real dynamic of, neither of us really want what we have in life, and we feel like we understand each other, and that's huge for both of us, just the fact that we can sit with each other. But it didn't come across as this sort of cheesy. I loved Lord of the Rings, do not get me wrong, but like Faramir and Eowyn in the last scene, it was like, oh, that's very convenient for everyone. Like, they just happened to meet and happened to fall in love, and that's great. Layden and Thraina was much more real than that. So overall, I think I have the same gripes as a lot of people. As, oh, it would have been great if fill in blank. But at the time, I think he portrayed stuff that was very real. That was really rambling. Tim's used to my ramblings, but you all get to see it in real time, so I apologize.
Well, that's it. That those relationship dynamics were definitely something that, like, a lot of the questions I've received have been about, like, why didn't Layden and Ilya end up together, and why would you do this to us between Zephyrus and Vicanalia? And there's a couple answers for that. So I'll touch on those relationship dynamics in particular. As Landon said, do Layden and Thraina love each other by the end of book 3? No. And they're not meant to, but it's meant to be, once again, that one of the primary themes throughout this is hope for the future. And I think that's what they both find in each other. Layden is given this last task by Ilya to live, and he's like, what does that mean? I've been attached to what I've, expectations and honor and duty, and what does it mean to, like, be bound to honor and justice? And realize that, his last conversation with his mother Lenara at the end, it's kind of like, I've played this game and it's done now. I've finished, I've done my part, but I don't know what's next, and I don't even know how to go about figuring it out. And I think if Ilya would have, because Ilya is given the choice at the end by the creator, you can go back, you can rest, or you can serve. And I think for Ilya, there's a degree of, like, it's the familiar negative of service. She's comfortable in that role. It's been all she's ever known. I wouldn't say Ilya has a growth arc at any point. I think Ilya is Ilya, and I think she has her moments. But for the most part, Ilya is Ilya, and she finds comfort in that. For her to go back to Layden after giving this big whole goodbye about, live, I think that scared her. Because imagine having lived as many lives as Ilya's lived, to then try to go back and have this, this relationship with Layden. What if it's not the love she's imagined it to be? I think there's a genuine fear of that, because at the end of the day, she is still very scared. And I think she's tried to wear this martyr's cloak, if you will, and it doesn't fit her. she's not a martyr. I think there was just a fear. I think she had a genuine fear of, what if I go back and it's not what I thought we were. Whereas Layden's, Layden's perspective, I think Ilya hits the nail on the head when she tells him, like, if, the reason why I pretended to be the guardian and I didn't tell you the truth, that, your Ilya is gone, she's at peace, is because she, once again, she believed that he would not be able to let her go. He would not live. And I think it would have been a cheap ending for both of them if they just, like, I'm back, let's be, peasants
Ride off into the
together.
sunset together.
Yeah, I think, like, for both of them, it would have cheapened their story. But with that said, I wanted seeds for, is this story done? And that's something that we're going to talk about. Like, as much as this trilogy is finished, doesn't mean this series is over. And that is one such seed that I think would be a really interesting takeoff point. And we will talk more about those seeds and takeoff points in a bit. But sticking to the relationships with Zephyrus and Vicanalia, Zephyrus's last chapter, it ends with the prospects of, once again, hope, the hope for the future. Like, I'm going to keep trying. I'm not going to give up on this. But he looks at Phoenix and he looks at Ilya basking in the light and glow of the creator, and they seem so pleased and content to be there. And he's like, what is wrong with me that I'm here, literally a god, and this is not where I want to be? And I think that is very true to Zephyrus's story throughout. Zephyrus doesn't want to be the hero. He doesn't want these responsibilities, but he does them because he truly believes it is the right thing to do. And that does lead to a lot of personal tragedy. So his ending of, like, I'm not done. He's holding her ring. It's his tears that restart the rains, the nightly rains for New Rania. And I wanted him to have something. It's another seed. Do you think he's just going to be like, all right, it's cool,
Absolutely not. He'd never just check out and be like, bye guys, I'm done. Like, straight up, I kind of saw it as like a Will Turner situation from Pirates, where it was like, oh, Captain Jack sacrificed his immortal life so that Will could live, but then he can only come back once every decade. And that moment where at the end, when I'm like crying and trying to read through my tears, like, Vicanalia, like, major spoilers by the way, Vicanalia is pregnant with Zephyrus's child, and she feels him in that, like, twilight hour. I loved that. I was like, oh, he's like right there, but she can't see him or like feel him, but she can. And I took that to mean that, like, he's gonna find a way to somehow get back to his family. And, like, that doesn't just mean Vicanalia and his child. It means, like, all of his friends, his brotherhood, back to his home, because he can't just walk off and be like, hey, yo, I'm a god now, bye, because that's not him.
Yeah.
He is a very much morally centric, like, how could I help? But it's more like, I'm not going to sacrifice my entire self for the greater whole, because that's not who I am. That's not what I want.
Yeah, that twilight hour that you referenced, Colleen just mentioned that as well. It's when I was writing that, like, that was a first draft and I didn't touch it. That was a first draft and I didn't touch it again after that. That just, like, really flowed out. And that, I'd say, like, you talk about, what scenes are you most proud of? That's definitely one of them for me, because, like, I felt like it was, if it's just Vicanalia and she's there and it's, looking out at the sunset, the rain's coming down, and she goes, well, hopefully, maybe one day, maybe tomorrow, like, that doesn't really give enough. So, like, and I think it is up to the reader a little bit to decide, is she imagining it, or is it real? For me, it's very much real. That
I
is
was gonna
that is
say, for
him.
me, it felt real. Like
Yeah.
I could see where some people could interpret it as imagination, but for me, because I kind of related to Vicanali a little bit, I was like, that's real. Like that I've had similar, like, not sensations, but like when you're alone and you feel like, oh hey, there's someone here with me, and it's like, but they're not, you're alone. It's like, but you can feel it.
So we have to redefine what is real, right?
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
felt it. It's real. So I think that for them, once again, seeds, where like for the story to continue, to not just have this bow be real tight. I tied it up in a bow, but the bow is loose
Loosely.
and the bow can unravel really quickly.
Yeah,
Um,
I was like, oh, you could have so much fun with this, because open-ended endings I think are my favorite, because not only is it a satisfying ending for this arc, these characters, but you have it open just enough for you to pipeline more stuff in without it feeling shoehorned or unnecessary. Because unnecessary sequels are like the bane of my existence. I hate them
same.
so much.
Yeah, and I did implant, and I can talk about this a little bit. I did plant seeds for the series to continue if and when it feels right to continue. I will say that because secondary and tertiary, like adding sequels for the sake of sequels, also bane of my existence.
Yeah, I was
Hate
gonna
it,
say.
ruins things, and I'm just like, let it end. Why'd you drag it out, and then it's
Yeah,
so
it's
it spoils
bloated,
it.
it's long, it's boring. You're like, God, can we please end this?
Yeah, and it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel right. So like my promise to you is that I will make sure I have an ending for that whole next arc.
Mhm.
And that ending is just as, if not more fulfilling than this ending. That's my, integrity. I'm not just going to write the stories because like, if there's a captive audience asking for it, I need to do the story justice
It
first.
needs to come from your heart and not because, oh, well, people want it. Well, people want a lot of things and they don't always get what they want. So,
And you shouldn't always get what you want. Sometimes you
right.
should. Sometimes you don't know what you're really asking for. But I think that the seeds that I planted into mostly they show up in book 3. So there's a couple of them. One, in the first chapter of book 3, Phoenix is in the anchor room with Paxeron, and Paxeron takes out of his cloak a link in the chain. And that link in the chain is a recall back to book 2, the beginning of book 2, when Ilya was breaking the links of the chain and came across a very dark link that happened to be the father of Thraina. So Thraina's father, Barris, was also a blood mage, and it tainted his soul to the point where, that link is dark, whereas the others tend to have like, these vibrant colors flowing through them. Barris's does not. And Barris's story is shown more in Ghosts of Rhaenia, which will be the prequel, Thraina's origin story, her first battle with the Skeleton King. And that will be coming out in guesstimated January of 2025. So if you want more on Barris, there will be more in that story. But this corrupted link that's dropped back into the mortal realm, that is one such seed for a launch point for future books. So that's one. Number 2, when the story ends, we have the establishing of the Republic. So we're starting to see Daenella's plans for what is the future of New Rhaenia going to look like absent a monarch. And that chapter is riddled with, I think a very honest assessment by Daenella of like, this is not going to be easy. It's not going to be quick, but it will be better. And she says that a couple times over that last chapter of hers. Because like trying to foster peace in a world where there's so many different viewpoints and opinions, and like these people are still have some hold animosity, like mages are now just going to be like out in the open. Some people aren't going to like that. Some people are going to have, you know, some really big gripes with like, you enslaved me. Like, it's not like this isn't,
it's like you did a racism.
you did a racism. It's not cool. There was a lot of persecution, and those feelings don't just go away because, you know, we changed, you know, the national banner. Like,
yay,
it doesn't just
it's
go
all
away.
better now.
Yeah. There's certain things you can't wrap up in a bow, and that's certainly one of them. You know, 60 years of you know, oppression and genocide don't just kind of, you can't just wipe that away just because a couple people in power have realized like, ooh, that wasn't good. So it's a good step, but that step is going to be followed by many other hard and difficult and challenging steps. And Daynella brings Lenara directly into the fold, Lenara and Cinnamon.
Well, I bit my lip at that. I was like, oh, that's not a great idea. That could lead to a lot of conflict. I mean, it's a great idea from the concept of like, hey, yeah, it's a person that is literally on the opposite end of the spectrum of you. Great, different line of thinking, but also dangerous because you guys are just gonna butt heads like all the time.
That butting of heads makes me very excited. I get very excited thinking about like the political, you know, we talk about like, I feel like book 1 had a lot of the political elements to it. Books 2 and 3 much less because it's much more focused on the cosmic structures. So this, like, where I would like that, you know, the next, you know, future installments to at least begin with is more on the mortal side of politics. And I think that new ecosystem of the Republic of the Nine trying to get its feet, but still having like rivalries within. Like the people on the council are not friends. The senators are not friends with the plebs. The plebs are not friends with the mages. The mages are not friends with necessarily with the other Celestics who kind of sat and, you know, didn't join the rebellion. There's a lot of there's a lot of
web. It's a spider web of conflict.
A lot of conflict, a lot of opportunities. So that would be the second seed, that very mortal, very human, just like we have different philosophies on how things should run. And then the third seed, which is a very big one. There's a couple little smaller ones, but the other one is this concept of, well, what is Azarath? So when Layla goes and finds this, you know, land just weirdly frozen.
Yeah, I was gonna say there was just like frozen land. I was like, what is that all about? Is that some god? Like, not a major god, but like, you know, minor gods in a pantheon, things that like, you know, they're home to specific islands or specific times of year or weather. It's like that could be a thing, but it was like there's no mention of any minor gods.
There is no mention of any minor gods. So where does this come from and why? And Paxeron touches on it in his like villain speech at the end when he's like arguing with the creator a bit, like, and he talks about like his relationship with Ophelia, and the, you know, the goddess of love, Ophelia, and God of love, God of peace, like what greater union could there be? Our daughter would have ruled the mortal realm. Well, that daughter was the woman in there's a in Azarath, there's this big temple of Azarath, this big cathedral, and there's this altar to Paxeron that she is kneeling in front of, wearing the crown that is the opposite to the blood artifact. So when Layla takes that, it starts to melt Azarath. So Azarath was, you know, a plan that didn't work out for Paxeron. He couldn't, in his hidden position, he couldn't do anything with it without revealing who he was. Yet, if the other gods in the system believe like this is just this is just what the creator's punishment looks like, no one's going to ask questions. And if the creator doesn't, and the creator is not forthcoming at all, No one's going
Why
to
would
know
they
any
be?
better. So this is just, it's Paxeron's long game. But now it's melting. Azarath is melting, and those people, specifically Paxeron's, not mortal daughter, is now going to be in a position of power and vengeance. And specifically, do I dare? No, I'll
Dare.
keep that. I'll keep that under
No.
wraps. I'll keep that under wraps. That because that I depending on how I present it, that could be like, oh, whoa.
Oh, okay.
So I'll save that bit.
But now that you're talking about this, it kind of reminds me of like the whole Atlantis myth, where it started off as like, at least Plato describes it as like, hey, it started with Poseidon and another god creating this island, and then they're like, oh well, we have godchildren who then made demigods, but then the further down the line you got, the less divinity they had, and then it just became humans being dumb and making dumb decisions, and the fall of Atlantis happened. Like, so that's what that kind of reminded me of, and I'm like, oh, it could be like that.
Yeah. And there's just so many opportunities to explore. To be honest, I haven't gone that far down the rabbit hole yet, but I just wanted, like, here are the seeds that I planted so that if I wanted to jump off, I could. And then there's little mini arcs, and not so many arcs, like, well, what's going to happen in Damascus's exile? And like,
what's going to happen to Zephyrus's kid? That's my question.
Also a very good question. And like,
how as a mother do you explain, hey, your dad isn't technically dead, but like also your dad is in a realm that I can't get to?
And he wants to be your
right
father,
he wants to be here, but
like, there's like, psychologically, whether it's abandonment or not, it's going to feel like abandonment. And that abandonment for a child growing up with that, where some people, because you have to think religion wise, theologically, how are people going to respond to this type of kid will need a special kind of therapy?
Well, how are people gonna respond to basically this child where it's like, oh, this is Zephyrus kid, oh, Zephyrus the god? Like, yeah. Are they gonna revere that child? Are they going to expect him to do more than his father did? Like, it's all about the succession, where it's like, oh well, your dad was great, so you have to be greater.
Yeah, and those are tough shoes to fill. And I think even more than that, though, like, some people are still going to think that it's the six. They're not going to buy the concept that Daenela was feeding them, that the six were dying. Some people are going to cling tight to that, like, no,
the fire was cold. Like,
oh, people have denied there. People have and still do deny much clearer signs, right?
That's fair.
And I think there's going to be people who, for one reason or another, cling to the past, that are still devout to the six. There's going to be other people who are still believe that this was the judge's providence, and that this was the fulfillment of the prophecies, and the champion of the nine. And there's going to be people who like double down on that. There's going to be other people who go like, no, this is a whole new thing. You're going to have people who become zealots and who idolize Zephyrus's image, which how dangerous could that be when those people begin to worship the
turn into a different cult
or the daughter? Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
No, please go ahead.
I think you explore that kind of dynamic in a character like Danis, where as Daenela is gathering allies for like this kind of final, it's the microcosm, right? Daenela is confronted with the idea of, okay, how do I get the system around me, which is devoted entirely to my son and the religion that I espouse, now I need to siphon as much manpower out of that as I can. And for some people, she's able to just show like, hey, the six are dying, the fire is cold. And she'll get some people to agree with that, and she'll get some people to follow her. But there are other people like Danis, who Danis is kind of a unique case because he's able to separate his faith from kind of quote unquote his objective reality.
I was gonna say
That
what's
sounds like
happening
a
around
critique on
him.
faith, and I don't mean it to be, but Danis spells out for Daenella. He goes, I am not here because you claim that my religion is wrong. I'm not here for that. I'm here because I disagree with what Damascus is doing. I think it's wrong, and I want to change it.
Right.
And so you've already, Tim, you already introduced this idea of people don't change their minds about things easily. Some people like Danis can walk that line of cognitive dissonance of, well, I believe this, but I see this, and I'm not sure what to do. They're able to walk that line, and then other people like Damascus can't. Damascus is the ultimate like example of plugging his ears and just refusing to believe anything. Now, of course, you walk through his arc of how Daenella makes him that way, but in the end, he's the one that just will not listen to anything that he can't agree with or can't understand. And so that will then talk about, you just explore that to the nth degree. Well, Damascus loses, but there are people that maybe weren't there or still hold on to it. And then they look at people like Danis and say, what did you do? Like you screwed this over for all of us. So even in your first trilogy, you're exploring these dynamics of how do people change, why do they change, and how deeply do they change? And I think you've set it up for more to come in the future.
There's so much, like, that's the thing about, like, I think my characters have a depth of further exploration, because there's enough presented. Even, you're mentioning, Danis is a tertiary character. He's basically fulfills the role function of, protector and advisor. He doesn't really impact the plot all that much in any of the three books. He serves more as a plot device and a character, just like role function. Yet I think there's a very real, relatable, and depth, like a degree of depth to him. And one of the questions I got, which kind of touches on that, was like, where was it? There are so many characters. Which B character is your favorite? And Landon, I know you have a favorite B character, so we'll talk about that. But yeah, my favorite B characters, like this will go into some like behind the scenes stuff as well. I know I said this would be a Q&A and I've only let you ask one question, but I promise we'll do that. But the B character that was my favorite in previous drafts was actually Hallan Helixis. So once upon a time, in drafts long ago in a galaxy far away, Ilia was the handmaiden, not of Daenella, but of Hallan Helixis. She served him. So we got a huge perspective of what it was like in Northridge, what it was like, what the political climate was like in Voltarsia. And Hallan and Horus, the dynamic between those two was so much more fleshed out. And, when you're like, oh, that's interesting. Like, why did it change? Well, because that first draft was 278,000 words. And we would have had to double book one, and then who knows what would have happened in book two. So a lot changed in that regard. But Hallan kind of became like, he has this like heroic stand for Landon at the end of book one, where he's like, true sentinels, like, defend your, like, it's just like, defend Landon. And I think that it says a lot about who he is in that like one tragic act, which ends up leading to his death. But so he's barely on page, but he was such an important and like wise, like he had this wonderful way of like, he was the Uncle Iroh of the story. And I lost that in this book. I don't feel like in this trilogy there really is that character who really serves that. I guess you could maybe say Patris, but once again, Patris is not really here. It's just Zephyrus's memories of him kind of guiding him back to the path that he was always supposed to be on. So I would say for me, that was my favorite B character. He didn't really get that in the story. Kalis, I also think is really interesting. Mavrin Kalis. He also was much bigger in previous drafts, and didn't really get as much of a chance to shine, which is why I am actually, if you follow me on Patreon, every month I'm releasing a chapter of his story. His story it begins right after the Treaty of 940 was signed. So if you can imagine, like, war is over, and like the stakes, what gladiatorium is changing as the Celestic people are enslaved, as the bastard sons of those who fought on the wrong side of the war are put into gladiatorium as punishment. Like, that's going to really follow his trajectory, and I think you get to see some of, like, much more of what his experience was, and how he, how someone goes from fighting on behalf of the Celestic people to then becoming a slave owner who kind of hates himself for it. And I thought that was just such an interesting dynamic that never got to see the light of day. So that's why, like, he's getting this episodic now. So I'm very excited to share that with people. But Landon, I know you have a favorite B character. I don't even know if your favorite B character is a B character. He might be a C or a D. But
considering that he only has about 6 pages of 6 pages worth of any time appearing on text. I was going to say 6 pages of screen time, but that's mixing the metaphors here. My favorite character is Hadrian. He doesn't appear at all in book 2. I'm gonna sound so
you're such a hipster
when I say. So in book 1, when we first meet him, it's when Damascus and Landon are going to the Ludus after the attack. I think this is right before Landon had been made captain of the Sentinels. The Sentinels are just an idea at this point.
Right. Yeah, it's right after he's named captain of the Sentinels.
Damascus is like, okay. Owen is sort of going through his mind of like, okay, how are the Sentinels going to work? And he's still wrapped in on what duty means. And Damascus still thinks this is all really stupid and he doesn't care. And they're all teasing Amos because Amos lost a duel to Vicanalia and they're teasing him about it. And then you have Hadrian. And I remember asking Tim, I was like, who's this Hadrian guy? And Hadrian was described as, he's kind of the guy that doesn't fit in, but everyone likes him. He's just always kind of there. And as the guy who felt like that a lot growing up, instantly I was like, okay, Hadrian's my boy. And then I forgot all about him in book 2 because he's not in book 2. Appears in book 2. And then he shows up in book 3. And Amos is now in power. By the time we see Hadrian again, Amos has taken over the Vigils, or the Jackals. He's taken over the Jackals. And Amos has been revealed as just the biggest piece of garbage that has ever been written, in my opinion. Amos is horrible. But Hadrian is his lieutenant. And Tim writes Hadrian as this shell. He doesn't talk much. When he's introduced in book 1, how Tim described him to me is he's kind of jovial, he's kind of chubby, he just loves life. He's just kind of happy to be here. And when we see him in book 3, he is completely devoid of all of that. And I won't get into it, but a lot of people know what it's like at varying levels to be stuck with somebody. I'll say in a workplace environment. It doesn't always have to be in a workplace environment, but you're stuck next to someone who just sucks the life out of you,
Yeah.
whether they mean to or not. You add to that, Amos is very clearly this abusive, manipulative, terrible human. And instantly I felt so sad for Hadrian. I was like, I feel like Hadrian knows exactly what's happening to him. He is being pushed around. He's being forced to do things that he thinks are morally wrong. And he doesn't know how to get out of it.
Mhm.
Anytime he ever voices anything to Amos, Amos takes him apart. Because Amos is smarter than him. Amos is crueler than him. Hadrian is never going to be as cruel. He's never going to be uncle whom he loves, and his uncle loves him. And there's this beautiful fight scene where neither of them are really trying to kill each other, but they know that they have to. So they're doing this impressive dance of keeping each other safe. And then
While
it
trying to
culminates.
exhaust each other.
Yeah, trying to sort of wear the other down.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out another way of getting out of it. And then Hadrian snaps in this moment. And Tim and I had talked a lot because I won't go into it. I freaking hate Amos. Amos became I ranted a lot about Amos when I had to voice him because I just hate Amos. And I talked a lot about who is going to kill Amos, who deserves to kill Amos. And maybe it was Threna, maybe it was Vicanalia, because he was he was abusing women all throughout the book. And I was like, how dramatically ironic would it be if Vicanalia gets to cut him? Like, he loses the duel, so maybe Nalia kills him. And out of left field, it was Hadrian. And I talked a lot. We had a long conversation when that chapter was over about how much I appreciated. I'm not huge. I'm not smart enough to see a lot of like to feel like I know a lot about representation in books. I, by my own admission, but I remember opening up to Tim and I was like, Tim, you've shown a young man who was taken apart by someone who was more powerful than him. And instead of glorify, like, this isn't Hadrian like rising up and defeating Amos. I felt like Tim really captured this tragedy of Hadrian. We talked about like how one thing would have been different, and Hadrian would have met a girl who like was the fourth daughter of some duke, and he would have gotten married and had no land and opened up a bakery and had 4 kids that just
We're so average.
were just average. And he would have been the happy. Sorry, Zephyrus and Vicanalia, y'all can have your happy ending. No one would have been happier. Hadrian would have had had an average life with average family, with average kids, and he would have loved every minute of it. Instead, Tim showed that Hadrian doesn't get that. Hadrian is one of the most broken people at the end of this whole series. And as sad as that is, I hope, I'm not putting Tim on here, I hope that Hadrian has some healing. If we keep going with this series,
He
one of the people that I want
deserves it.
he
More than any of the other characters.
He deserves a warm cup of soup and a blanket over his shoulders and someone to tell him that he's okay.
Yeah.
But he became he instantly was one of my favorite characters, and I thanked Tim profusely for him. We just saw a young man who was the victim of the system.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way that the slaves weren't, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not at all to compare the two.
Right.
But showing that there were people in power who were just as
taken advantage of by the same system.
Yeah. I thought it was very beautiful. I thought it was very tactful. It's hugely painful to watch, but I think it's very real. And I saw a lot of my life in Hadrian. And so he became my favorite. He's the character, he's probably one of the characters with the least amount of screen time. And he was just my favorite because I think
You're such a hipster, such an
in
inky
there,
answer.
hidden in that story is a very, very beautiful and very tragic story. That is Hadrian. So he will always be my favorite.
This concept of like one of the themes that I really wanted to touch on with Hadrian, and he's once again, he's such a small part of the huge story, but this power dynamics between, it's hard to stand up to your bullies. It's hard to stand up to your oppressors. It's harder to stand up to your friends, the people who are supposed to be your like in crowd. And so I remember we were recording book 2, and this is right after Amos kills Marcus and then stabs Vicanalia. And Landon, you paused the recording. You were like, who is going to kill this guy? Who's going to do it? And like, my only response to you, I was like, do you want to know? And you were like, not yet. And I said, it's going to be one of his victims. And, you know, there's so many people he victimizes. And it's just there's one exchange where the vigils are trying to escort like the freed people who won't be fighting, and the Voltarcian refugees who shouldn't be fighting inside the gates of Salmantica. And Zephyrus and Vicanalia are in disguise. Daenela is wearing a faceless mask. And like, as they're trying to get in, we have Amos doing Amos crap. He's taking advantage of his power. He's abusing women. Hecklin is like, is this necessary? And Amos kind of like looks to Hadrian, and he's just like, yep, yes it is. Isn't that right? Isn't that right? And
back me up, you're my buddy.
Yeah. And I find if I find that if this is a ruse, if this is like a ruse of some kind, well, you're gonna have to kill your uncle, aren't you, Hadrian? And that kind of just like, clearly Hadrian's not just like, yeah, let's.
He's using people as a bargaining chip to get the answers that he wants, which just makes him even more deplorable and disgusting. Because it's like, oh, not only do you not have the trust of your friend, you're using his family as a means to get him to do what you want. Disgusting. Yeah,
he's awful. He's really the villain of the story. And once again, he's literally the hand that deals the death blow of quite a few characters. So it's he's meant to be hated. And so anyway, Hadrian, I don't know if he constitutes a B character, but I'm glad he had such an impact.
Classify him a B character since he had one of the biggest impacts.
He does get a pretty, it's hard to call it a heroic moment, because as he's just like laying into Amos's face, it's not like a crime of passion. It's not like he's yelling and he's just like, he's angry.
He's broken and he's sad, and he's just like, I can't look at this man anymore. He's not who I thought he was. And and he's rageful because it's like, you've used me, you've used my family, you've used the people below you. Like, no.
And he was trying to seize an advantage of a moment to kill a man who was trying to spare his life, and who happens to be his uncle. I think so. It's just, I thought it was it's a tragedy, as Landon said. It's a tragedy that he has to rise to this situation, because he probably would have been very content to just be on the outside of the in crowd. He would have been very content to just be there, be invited to the parties, but like not really have to do anything like that. That was what he wanted. But okay, I will stop rambling. Does anyone have a question that you would like to ask? You came here, you can ask questions. I can get to these other questions later.
What was the scene that was like, that made you the most emotional as the writer Like, did you find yourself like choking up? Did you find yourself angry? Like, what scene brought on what emotions? It was hard.
There's a lot of those. There's a lot of
Yeah.
those. I would say a lot of these poignant moments do come from somewhere in my life. Now, I have not fought and killed a god. I have
Right,
not,
right.
but like you know, I feel like there's a lot of little moments that aren't necessarily big scenes that I'm particularly proud of because they're so personal to me. So once again, like the concept of Hadrian standing up to his bully friend, that was like, I was like, this is such a good ending for this arc. Like, I loved it, but like, I don't know if when I wrote it, I was like, I don't know if other people will. Things like Stegovax's death, which I've gotten a lot of feedback. Everyone's first reaction is kind of like, he just kind of died. Like, why didn't Phoenix kill him? And I was like, because he died a slave's death, he doesn't get this elaborate, glorified
He doesn't
thing.
join the war. He doesn't try to make a big change. It's just that, oh, he died. You're like,
he died. He died a slave's death because that's all he was good for. That's all he ever wanted to be. He was a bad person. And you can say like, well, that was the system. Sure. But he bought into the system and he used the broken system as it was to be a bad person. He used his might is right. He takes down Latinus, who by all accounts is like this beloved guy that no one has a problem with, even in other luduses. Everyone respects him, and he stabs him in the back just so he can get a leg up. Like, even in the code of the Brotherhood, that is not the way of how this works. So like, he's not a good guy. He didn't deserve this glorified thing. And I think the themes in that case, like, would it have been very cathartic for Phoenix to be able to defeat him in the honor duel that he wanted after saving his life with, risking his own life, using his healing magic to, resuscitate him back to a place where he could heal and survive? Would it have been like cathartic for Phoenix? Yes. But this is not about Phoenix getting his glory as you see it by the end of book 3. It's not about Stegovax getting the death that he believes he deserves because he's a champion gladiator, dies a slave's death. And that, to me, that simple nothingness, that was like powerful to me. Because I think it shows so much of how broken the system is as a whole. That not all stories get this like you don't even when it ends in tragedy, doesn't mean it's a big deal, especially like for a system that does not care about, it's meant to churn and burn and not dispose of. Cassius, I think, says it best to Vicanalia in book 1. She's like, they're people, and he's like, they are slaves to be used, abused, and discarded when they've lost their value. And that is the system that Stegovax subscribed to, and that is why he gets the end he gets. So like, there's little moments like that probably don't make for like, the best story, but I also don't ascribe to the notion of like the writers of the showrunners for Game of Thrones who said like themes are for 8th grade book reports. This was very much a thematic decision over a I chose a thematic one. Say it again.
Over like a narrative one. So yeah.
Like the themes outweighed the like, oh, but wouldn't it be so great for Phoenix? Like, yeah, it would be for him, but Phoenix is not going to get what he wants because what he wants is the wrong thing. So if I glorify Phoenix's like
wrongness,
toxicity, because his desires are toxic. He wants glory. Glory is not something that we as humans, that I believe we should be like pursuing. It is not something that I value. It is not something that I believe people should value. And therefore, if I romanticize it and cast it in a light that does draw so much attention to it, I think that actually sullies the power of the moment. So I'd say like there's moments like that that really stand out to me that I'm emotional with. But I would say the hardest dynamics for me were the mother-son relationships. So whether that was Zephyrus with Arcadia, whether that was Landon and Lenara, or even Landon with Daenella, because Daenella does take on
there was so much tension between those two, like all the time. I felt myself holding my breath every time they had a conversation. I'm like, which one of you is going to blow up first?
Yeah.
Like,
with which one, Daenella or Lenara?
Daenella and Landon. It was just like everything with them felt like a chess match. I'm like, can you guys chill?
And the answer is neither of them can. They have
I know.
Zero
but
chill.
They're like, guys,
zero chill. And I thought that was something that like those moments, and I wanted to showcase like three very different types of mother figures and very different mother-son relationships. Those were hard for me to write for sure personally. I think when Landon and Lenara's last conversation was probably one of the most challenging to get right, because I think it's so deeply nuanced of, you know, Lenara weaponizes her status as mother to Landon, whereas Landon has the tattoo on his forearm of, you know, his mother's house. In book one, Daenella is in Landon's room after Landon has like escaped after his execution. She's sitting in his room and looks at like the banners, and he has, you know, the Helixis and the Fair banner like over his bed, and she's like, how many sons honor the, you know, the coat of arms of their mother? And his mother's not even a noble house. So it's just like, it shows what Landon values. And I think it demonstrates that like when Landon gets his opportunity to have his mother back, he's immediately kind of pulled into it. And she has this kind of like hot and cold. And it's like, he doesn't really know. In that first scene after the midpoint in book two, he just literally narrowly escaped death. And his mother's like, why are you here?
Yeah.
Are you talking to me as a leader,
Or
as a king of Baltarsia? Or are you talking to me as your son? And that, like, when she creates these kind of like boundaries and these lines, it really tears him up. And I feel like he doesn't know how he's supposed to feel in that. So wanting to convey the confusion of that relationship without giving away like where this is going to end up. Because I knew this relationship is not like, it's not going to be like a, you know, it's like, it's not. Because in many ways, when Lenara has to give up her son by like, you know, Daenella literally threatens Lenara, like, if you try to contact Landon, I'll have him killed. And because of that, Lenara's son in her mind is dead. He's gone. He's been gone. And so therefore she doesn't love him the way a mother loves a son. But Landon never has that experience with Lenara. So from his perspective, that's his mom, who he thought was gone, who he never stopped loving, but now she's here. And
what do I do
knows
with this?
that and almost weaponizes that.
Yeah.
She tries to utilize that to make him do what she wants, even though she doesn't say like, well, you should do this. She's like, make a decision, and then kind of leaves. And she does that a couple of times. And at the beginning of book 3, when he's saying like, we have to go help the Baltarsian people from this Skeleton King, and she's like, I don't see how that benefits the Fallen.
Yeah, why would we do that? It has nothing to do with us. And it's like, yeah, but it has everything to do with us.
and that fundamental divide, and she's just willing to let him go. She's willing to say, like, if you want to do that, go ahead, but don't take all the boats and don't take all the men, because that ain't happening. And we'll show up once the fighting's over, and we'll take over what's left. And that, I think that moment. So like, and then at the end, in the last scene, she shows up and she's like, "We came," and he's like, because he says, "I'm surprised you showed up.
Yeah.
You didn't wait till after the battle." And he's like, "Yeah, we came." And
like,
now there's a lot of work to do. There's another battle coming, and we need you. And he's like, "No, no, 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 no. It's finished." And I think that is him finally standing up for himself, and not letting the system dictate him. I think Landon always kind of thought himself like a little, chip on the shoulder, a little bit of a rebel, in the sense that, like, raised by, son of a duke, pleb mother, dad's
not going to
gone,
conform to the system.
Like, and he's kind of, wherever he is, he's kind of on the outskirts of like acceptability. He's this like, pseudo prince. Like, he's very capable, but he doesn't really garner much respect from anyone. And that chip on his shoulder is not really, he doesn't do it because he wants to. I think he does it because he doesn't know what else to do. Right. So his stand of like, him realizing like, my dad couldn't do this. He tried it. He couldn't do this. No, what king could possibly do this? I'm not going to let you saddle me with this. And because I don't believe in it. And I think his commitment to his virtues, right or wrong, because once again, I think he does all like, I think he has really good intentions in book 2. And he doesn't necessarily always, his really good intentions that do not always pan out. And I don't think he always necessarily follows through in the ways that he would like to, specifically in book 2. I think he has some challenges there, but him standing up to his mother, that was a moment that was A, difficult to write, and B, I was proud of him in that moment. So I'd say that's one that really does come to mind. In terms of just difficulty writing, because it's like, this is a hard chapter. In book 1, it's Ilya in the throne room getting her head cut off. I still think that chapter might be the most brutal. In book 2, it's when Damascus kills Varos.
That my mouth dropped open whenever that. I was like, no. Also, what was the rest of the prophecy going to be? That's been bugging me since book 1. It's been really, really bugging me.
Ilya's prophecy?
Yeah, when she was
unless
in
you.
Yeah, unless you, and then she got cut off. I'm like, no, I want to know what the rest of it is.
Well, and that's the thing. I think it's important that she does. It's important that Daenela doesn't know.
Right.
But in reality, it's, unless you change.
Right.
And in Daenela, like in its simplest form, unless you change. So when Daenela struggles hugely in book 2, like she's a major player in book 1, and she is almost a zero player in book 2, because she's just so distraught by the results of her decisions. Every move she's made, and it's not for lack of competency. Like Cersei in Game of Thrones, like everything, and I'll separate book Cersei from show Cersei. The show, I think, makes her appear more competent than she is in the books. She's just screwing up left and right. She's making her own problems. And I did not want that to be Daenela's story.
Right.
It's not for what she does. It's just things don't work out, but it's not because like, oh, that was dumb. That was dumb, Daenela. Why are you doing that?
Like, unforeseen avenues of like, hey, yeah, you made a choice. Here are the ripple effects of said choice.
Yeah. And the effects that has on the impressionable mind of Damascus. So one of the other really hard scenes to write was Damascus coming home after losing the battle outside of the Cassius Ludus at the end of book 2, and returning back to Salamantica empty-handed. And she's like, did you win? What happened?
Are you winning, son?
And are you winning, son? And he's like, no, Mom, not winning. So that scene where he's kind of like, you can see him starting to like break bad.
Yeah.
Because like he's kind of laughing about it, and he's kind of like, you know, oh, mother, and it's like this kind of, that scene, that dynamic between them of like, she's like, what have I done to you?
Yeah.
And her taking a personal accounting of that, I think is really hard. I think that's hard for Daynella.
That was like the first step for her to realize, though, like, oh, I've really messed up. Maybe I should like take a step back from this.
Yeah.
Because it was after that conversation that she like kind of snuck out and went to, you know, the city and was like listening to all of the differing viewpoints of the plebs. And I was like, wow, not only are we taking accountability, but we're perspective seeking. Good.
Yeah. And I remember I was talking to my editor about this. Like, I want and she, at this point, my editor had read book 1, knows book 1, Daynella, hadn't read book 2, and I was talking about like, this is what I'm thinking for book 3. And she went, wait, Daynella? Redemption arc? Like, yeah, that's gonna be really hard. And I was like, I think I can do it though.
Yeah.
I think narratively, Daynella's, this was one of my questions, like whose character arc is my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
I would say Daynella's character arc is my favorite. I do not think, everyone is like, oh, she has this, you know, I don't know if it's fair to call it redemption. I think redemption is the label most people will put on it, because she's acting in favor of the characters we value. However, does Daynella really change?
I wouldn't say she redeems herself. It's more of like a new form. Like, it's like, oh, I've understood the consequences of my actions, taken accountability for them, and I'm now actively striving to make a change to help fix it.
But what is the change that she makes? And it's because it's really, it comes down to, and she says this with Landon, you know, she says, can you trust that I will do anything to stop the age of the end? And that's it's that argument that convinces Landon, like, yeah, I actually can trust her, because she's crazy.
I think that it was Landon putting trust in her that gave her the ability to do the remainder of her arc. Because without Landon giving trust to her, she wouldn't have felt or had the drive in herself to, I think, pick herself back up and do what she did the rest of the book.
So I disagree. I think, because at one point I did consider having Landon reject her help. Like, we're going to do this without you, because you tried to kill my dad. You tried to kill me. And then it was going to be like him going, I lied to Zephyrus.
Yeah, you did some questionable things too, my guy.
I was gonna drag that out a little bit, and I was like, I don't have time for this. So I ended up kind of expediting that process. But the plan for Daynella was, she was going to act for Landon, even if he wasn't willing to accept her help.
Right.
She was going to advocate for him, whether he wanted her help or not. And that, I think that shows, like, it wasn't anyone else's external. I think that's the big thing for Daynella. She does not really rely on anyone else's validation. She is extremely assured of herself. And that's something I always liked and valued about Daynella. One of the questions was like, you know, who's your favorite character to write? Daynella was the easiest character to write, because I loved her self-assurance. Whereas I'd say Zephyrus was the hardest to write, which is, you know,
and why was
kind
that?
of ironic.
Why was Zephyrus the hardest to write?
He's the main character. I would say he was the hardest because two things. In the beginning, he has no mememories. So
amnesiac characters are just the hardest.
I like to think that I did him well. I like served the amnesiac like story arc well in that. I kind of use him as a device to integrate, like we talked about audience integration
He's
off
like the
recording
reader. He has
earlier.
no idea what's going on. Therefore, he can act as a vehicle for the reader to understand things and get
Yeah,
exposition without it being exposition.
yeah, like it
Yeah.
definitely smooths that transition into the story, but also like he's purely based on, he makes decisions purely on principle because he has no biases, he has no preconceived prejudices that he can remember. So that, writing a character that, and when I teach, character writing, it's like they need to have there's a status quo that they need to want to try to change. um and he just has this fire in his belly of like, well, this is wrong,
Yeah.
and I don't like that, and he kind of goes full bore into it. His and He has this, like, thematically, it's called a vengeful realm because Zephyrus is someone who should seek vengeance at every turn. Layden betrays him, Thraina betrays him, Baikanalia owns him. Like, Daenela really, like, really tries to give it to him. He should hate all of these people,
Right.
and he doesn't. Not only does he not hate them, he gives them second chances, and these second chances reward everyone. And this concept of, okay, well, what's the antithesis of vengeance? It's offering mercy, it's offering forgiveness. So I think Zephyrus is less of a person and more of an ideology, and writing an ideology without the personality behind it was very challenging because I was like, who is this guy? Like, what is he like? And that really got boiled down to, and that was probably over the course of several drafts, was Zephyrus is an ideology, and I think that's why he's a little harder to connect to. I think more like, especially a lot of my male readers tend to connect better to Layden, and that's why Layden exists. Layden is more relatable. Zephyrus is a vehicle to understanding the story and a vehicle for the theme, but I think Layden is a more identifiable character for a lot of reasons. So that made Zephyrus really difficult to write. Any other questions?
So, mine's kind of a two-parter. So, going back to our discussion about Daenela, Daenela, like you said, doesn't really change. She switches teams, but you and I talked about how she still calls Lenara out of the crowd without her consultation because it's good for her. He's like, I need Lenara on this council, and I'm going to put her in a position where I know she can't say no. She still manipulates people. She still lies. She still does all the things. So my first part of my question is, do you think Daenela ever becomes a hero, even though she still does that? And secondly, with Zephyrus, if he, especially when he starts out, by the end of it, he has his memories, he has his relationships with some of his friends. Do you think that Zephyrus becomes a hero over the course of the series? And when do you think that happens? Or why not? I guess those are the two parts. Are these people heroes? And if so, how and when?
Sure. What a great question. Is Daenela a hero? I think Daenela is a hero of sorts. Is she a traditional hero? No, because she's not necessarily interested in saving the day for others. But where I do think that she is a hero is the willingness and the ability to accept fault and recognize she was wrong. I do think that is a very heroic quality. Will she ever stop manipulating people? Manipulation, most people would agree, it's not a good quality to have. Will she ever move past that? Probably not. I think that that would be very difficult for her because she's so skilled at it, and it has worked out well for her at many different points in time. So that reinforcement would be really hard to break down. And for her to realize, like, okay, yeah, manipulation bad. She realized like, okay, the type of manipulation I used on Damascus was real bad. That was bad. And like, will she do that again? No, I think she would learn in that regard. But like politically, would she still motivate people? Yeah, but that's what also makes her a very skilled politician. So I don't ever think we'll get like, if we look at heroism on a spectrum, she will never reach that side of the spectrum. But at the same point in time, do I think she has heroic qualities that are worth celebrating and idolizing? Absolutely. I think the ability to identify like, ooh, I messed up and I messed up big and I'm willing to change. That's really hard. I think that's certainly something that's worth constituting like, yeah, that's heroic. In Zephyrus's regard, Zephyrus leading, so when we get this more in book 2, we see who Zephyrus was prior to Thraina poisoning him. And when we kind of see the way in which he was acting,
he's so arrogant, and he's kind of like, he kind of gives F-boy energy. I don't really know if
absolutely
that's like it. Absolutely. I was just like, oh, I hate this version of Zephyrus. He's terrible. Like, he's pompous. He's just a prick. You're like, oh my god, dude, shut up.
And so, like, can you blame Thraina for not trusting him?
No, I don't.
No. And then, like Landon, we've talked about Landon, we've talked about like if Thraina would have told Zephyrus the truth, Zephyrus would have forgiven her. But the Zephyrus Thraina knows probably wouldn't have. And it's the change of Zephyrus over the course of book 1, where like losing his memories, that I think that's so crucial. Zephyrus's F-boy energy. Yeah, that's some merch.
Oh my god.
But so I think Zephyrus's past, Zephyrus's upbringing, despite Patris's best like attempts, I think being raised and being told like, you know, you're important,
you're special,
and we need you, and yeah, you like your parents are such and such and so and so, and you know, you have this amazing ability to balance all of this type of, you know, magic, and you're highly skilled at it, and you're
well, and that's what I'm worried about for his son. If you ever touch on an aspect of his son, it's like, are we gonna get a version of his son that Zephyrus could have been? Like, that's kind of like my fear, because it's like all those expectations gave Zephyrus like F-boy energy. Like, what is that going to do to his son? Is his son going to crumble?
I don't know though, Jordan, because Aunt Thraina knows how to fix that. She's fixed it once
before. That's very true. Actually, yeah, you have a point. He's got more mentor
we'll be good to go.
That's very true.
Aunt Thraina coming in and be like, "Hey, I need you to drink this. You're really
oh my god, no!
So just take a sip of this. We're gonna fix this right now."
Oh my god!
I just feel like Aunt Thraina has a tried and true method to snipping.
It's just a character reset. It's like when what is it? Retconning. You're retconning the character. It's
and what's Mom Vikinali gonna do? Aunt Thraina, what did you do? I fixed the problem.
I fixed your son. Here you go.
I fixed it. I already had to deal with this once before. I'm not doing this a second time.
Yeah.
I need Thraina tea merch where it's just like, forget all of your troubles, and it's just like tea.
Just sip this.
Wow.
Yeah,
you know, you're really irritating me. Sip this.
Yeah. Thraina doesn't want to deal with Zephyrus.
Have a seat right over here. Have a seat. Have a seat. Have a cup of tea. Have a seat right over here.
Forget all your problems, all your worries.
I think
forget all my problems and all my work.
Yeah.
I definitely think that Zephyrus's child, I haven't decided, like, you know, is it a boy? Is it a girl? Are they twins? Like, I haven't decided.
Right.
I think, and like, what would their personalities be? I also haven't decided, because I feel like I definitely think they would struggle with my father is some kind of, you know, hero some people worship and idolize. And then I hear stories from like Uncle Sarek and my mom won't shut up about him. And yet I think all of the great things that the child would hear would be juxtaposed with this, like, yeah, but you're not here for me.
Right. Right.
And
This
how would
underlying theme
that,
of abandonment where it's like, I know you didn't actively choose to leave me, but you still left me. Like it's like if you have a parent that passes away, it's like you don't blame them for getting sick and dying, but it's like, why'd you leave me? Like, and that makes it very sad and very complicated, because then it's like, well, if they were here right now, they'd tell you that they'd want to spend every moment with you because that's the truth. But it doesn't help ease that guilt and that pain of like, I still feel like I'm missing something, and that's
yeah,
your fault. Like,
and
quote
that's
unquote.
the very human
Yeah.
thing to have to experience, and a very difficult thing to process. So I definitely think that would be, I I would think long and hard about the personality, and the struggles they would go through, and who their influences would really be. I think that, like, I do think that this character would be, Vicanalia would surround them with a lot of father figures.
Like
Um,
Layden and, I mean,
well,
Sarek.
Layden, no one's going to hear from for a long
Oh
time.
no, dude.
Layden goes off into the sunset, quite
Yeah.
literally. But I definitely think, like, there's people like Sarek, there's people like Paris, there's people like Iberian, there's people in his life who would, who, some who knew his father, some who didn't, um, who
Right.
would very much fulfill some semblance of
It
that
would fill
role.
that role to an extent, but it would never be that that's your dad.
Exactly. And I think that, like, you want to introduce some conflict. Would, someone, be trying to pursue Vicanalia and she'd be resisting, but, like,
Like
if they have some
The
kind of
Odyssey,
leverage.
where everyone's trying to get Penelope because it's like, oh, your dad's been gone for 20 years. She needs to be married. And it's like, no, I'm gonna find my dad and he's gonna beat you all up.
Yeah. My dad's better than your dad. I think there would definitely be, like, there's a lot of opportunities. I'd have to explore it. But yeah, I think Zephyrus realizes who he wants, because I think the moment he realizes that he is and wants to be a hero is, so he takes the role of freedom is not just like a nice thing. It is a civil liberty that everyone should have. And he says it to the Doctore, Oren. He says, like, I should have the choice of where I have a roof over my head and what I put in my belly and
What I choose to do with my life.
what I choose to do. And I think that it's before that moment where he realizes, like, it's not just what I do, but how I accomplish it that matters.
Right.
And I think that is the most heroic quality of all. That it's not just a matter of the ends justifying the means, which is where Daenela still will always struggle. The ends will justify the means. That is something that I think Thraina does overcome, because she's very much a victim of the ends justifying the means. The Skeleton King is the be all end all,
and her uncle and everything. Like, it's, when you live in that mindset, it's very hard to undo it. It's very much like undoing trauma.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, this character made choices because they had to survive. And now that they're no longer having to survive and get through a day, it's, what do you do now? You have to heal. You have to undo everything you've learned and basically start back at square one, which just makes everything so much harder, because you're like, oh, I've been through so much. And it's like, yes. And a lot of it was bad. Like, you need to learn how to, and by live, I mean like actively play a part in life, not, oh, I'm surviving through life.
Yeah. And I think for Thraina in particular,
Tim on a pedestal. Sorry, just to put Tim on a pedestal.
Oh, hopefully we don't lose him.
Whoops.
Like he said, the
Okay,
prequel is being worked on right now. No spoiler. Oh,
Right.
am I breaking up?
You're great.
Oh,
Yeah, just
yeah.
you're coming
As
back
always.
though. So just repeat what you just said.
Tim explores the idea of we meet Thraina after she's reached that point of
Right.
I can't rely on anybody. I've tried to do things the right way and it didn't work.
Mhm.
So there is no, she rejects the idea that there's a right way.
Right.
There's the way and that's it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I look forward to and I'm enjoying so far working on the prequel is Tim explores that. Thraina wasn't born that way. She
Mhm.
had experiences that taught her there is no right way to do this. There is the only way to do this. And I can't
Mhm.
worry about those things. And I think that's important because so many times it's very rare. Maybe people will remind me of all these times that's not true, but we oftentimes meet characters where the ends justify the means after they've already reached that point.
Right.
We don't see the evolution
The
of
build
that
up
character
to it.
very often.
Yeah.
And so to make people excited for what's coming next, that's one of the processes of Tim's next work is we get to see Thraina become that person,
Yeah.
which makes watching her learn that that's not the way that it has to be
More impactful.
all the more satisfying.
Yeah.
We now get to see the full arc of how we become and then evolve from being that way.
Mhm.
Yeah, Thraina's and that like. Does anyone else have any other questions? Otherwise, I'll wrap with this probably long-winded answer to what comes next.
Yeah.
I do have a quick question for you, and I don't know how to phrase it very well. I was having a conversation with another author friend of mine a few weeks ago, and the conversation was really difficult for both of us because I would ask them a question about their work, and they would do that thing that many of us creatives often do where they'll only give half answers of
Mm.
well, it's like this, but it's nothing like that. And
Yeah.
this character's like this, but they're nothing like that. And for me, it was really hard because it made it difficult for me to become interested in their work because I didn't feel like I was learning anything. But it also was hard for me because I didn't know what questions to ask.
Right.
In my conversations with you, Tim, just with my conversations with you about your work, I feel like you do a very good job of let me give you a quick rundown. I'm not going to give you any spoilers, but I'm going to tell you things about my story that make you interested.
Mhm.
I don't feel like you meander. I don't feel like you're you're not bashful. You don't put yourself down. You don't walk around yourself. Number one, how did you reach that point as a creative to be able to, and maybe it's something that you struggle with, but how did you reach that point of, I'm not going to apologize. Let me tell you a little bit about my work. And then when you work with other artists, you work with other authors, how do you teach that? I'm so curious about that process.
Very good question. For myself, I don't want to say like, oh, that's just kind of innate, but I do think there's a degree of the amount of time I spend with my characters to not just see like I feel like I can resonate with them. Well, they're kind of like this, but they're also like not like that. I think that comes from the inability to explore the nuance. I think they have the creator has the ideas of like, I know I don't want this just like a real straightforward, bland, you've seen it before character archetype. And so I'm trying to showcase their highs and lows, but I can't articulate. I think that does come from a lack of connection with the character from the author's perspective. If they like, I'm just telling, like, if I asked you to describe me, your friend who you've spent years with, you could probably tell me everything about their personality because you know them, you've experienced things with them, you know how they're going to respond to situations. I think if the more time you spend with a character, you begin to see, well, this is what they say, but this is how they act. And that becomes that, you know, it becomes more human. It's less of like, I'm not telling you they're oppositional. I'm showing you like, well, they say this because they want to embody this, but they do this because they still struggle with this insecurity about themselves. And I think that articulation just comes through from a degree of intimacy and a degree of exploration. So the authors that I work with, I try to I really encourage a lot of this back end, off page, behind the scenes character work, because like if you understand this person, not this character, but if you understand this person, how they navigate through the story will be much easier. So that's one. And then two, when it comes to like being able to articulate that, if I asked you to describe your friend, you'd probably be able to do it. If you have trouble describing your character, if I asked you to describe someone you just met, you'd probably have a pretty similar like, like
they're nice, but other than that, I can't really tell you much. I just met them.
And I think that a lot of that just comes from being put on the spot and feeling like, oh God, I don't really know my characters that well, but I can't tell you that. So what can I say about them? And I think that it does kind of stem from that. And I think that's hard because like I definitely felt that way with Zephyrus, of just like, who is this guy? Like I don't know, and he's the main character. So like I think it took a lot of time. It took me a lot of time with him to understand like why and how and what would be part of his past to make this be the way in which he'd respond to these situations, to be able to know him enough to be able to communicate that through words on a page. Because it's honestly easier to describe, verbally, because if you can ask clarifying questions, there are no clarifying questions in the medium of writing books and writing stories. You know what I mean? If you have a question, you're on your own, champ.
And everyone interprets things differently. Like you can have things like tone and like voice for a character, but you could take that to mean one thing and I could take it to mean another. So it's like, it's good because then it's like, oh, well, I interpreted it this way. But then if it's something like the antithesis of what you wanted as the author, then it's like, ooh, I didn't do a good job of like explaining what I wanted to have happen here or showcase it enough.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's a creative responsibility. There's an artistic, there's a power you hold as the creator, as the artist, as the author, and you owe it to your readers to be able to guide them to what you want to guide them to. And sometimes that is like a choose your own adventure. Like there is like a lot of that out now. And, I think that appeals to a certain type of reader, but for the most part, storytelling is to tell a story, not let someone interpret.
Go on a journey, experience something.
Yeah. That's generally not the point of storytelling. It's a thing and it works and it can be done well, but for the most part, like you pick up a book expecting to be led through a narrative arc that's going to deliver, emotional resonance and catharsis. And I think that if you know your characters, because character is the vessel through which you will explore plot and you will see theme and you'll like realize this whole world that you've built. If we don't have that connection, if you as the creator don't have that to the character, then you are trying to navigate a boat without any sails or paddles.
Yeah.
It's going to be hard. It's going to be really hard to bring your reader to land. Especially the land you want them to arrive at. And I think that there is no substitute for time spent, the longer and quality time, right? Like just like your relationships with people, just because you have history with someone and you've known someone for a long time doesn't mean you really know them well. And you can have fast friendships where you haven't spent a lot of time with them, but you just feel like you know them so intimately. One of the characters, like this is my boy, this is like my kindred spirit.
Yeah.
So in in Thraina's origin story, there's another point of view character named Drakus who, when I first put like, proverbial pen to paper, his voice just flowed out of me. And it's not that I spent a tremendous amount of time with him. I did my normal character work and routine, but I'd say he more than others, I just felt like, oh no, I get this guy. Like we are, we are tight. And that's going to be it's going to be very easy to convey through the story. So I don't always think that time is the most important piece of the puzzle, but quality time is. Like I know there's people who like spend years world building, but then they spend 10 minutes on a character. And I do think that the world building should occur first, because then that can influence, okay, well, this is the world. How would that shape your character? What is the status quo established that they're going to push against? And that really does help you as the writer to navigate the story, knowing those things. However, if you don't really know the person that you're trying to have other people read shapes on a shapes of ink on a chopped down tree, and have them come away with it with an emotional resonance and catharsis, that's going to be really hard if that vessel is not super clear and cut and designed for the story you're trying to tell. So nothing really replaces character work. And Landon, I'm sure, like as an actor, like if you're given a script, right, or you're given like here are your lines, there's more to it than just like, well, these are the lines. Getting into character and tapping into these emotions, and even like watching you narrate and perform the audiobook, like you would literally change your body posture and your alignment and the shape of your face in order to achieve certain voices. And I think it's very similar, like the same way that you're getting to know a voice. I have to kind of feel out where characters are, and I think there's people who do it better than me, for sure. I like, there's so many authors who write extremely convincing and engaging and deep characters that feel like people, and that's why readers love them. There's a reason why. Well,
thank you. I think that's good advice for any creative, really.
Nothing quite replaces quality time. Same, just like relationships. But talking about like, okay, well, what's next, right? We've already talked a little bit about Ghosts of Rainia, which is Thraina's prequel novel that'll be coming out in January. If you've watched this and you're interested, I do have ARC signups. They're on my link tree. They can be found on my various social media. If you want direct, you can go to my website, timfacciola.com. It'll be part of my newsletter, so you'll have access to fill out the Google form and sign up to be an ARC reader for Ghosts of Rainia. I will be having like a special Discord group that will just be for the ARC readers for that to discuss. We'll have monthly Q&As just like this, to be able to talk about specifically Ghosts of Rainia. So that's in the works. Currently, I'm writing another prequel that kind of stands alone from A Vengeful Realm, but is also very deeply connected. I'm telling Arcadia's origin story. So Zephyrus's mother, Arcadia, it's her origin story that takes place in Pelosia, over 300 years before the events of A Vengeful Realm. So it's a completely different part of this world. It feels different. There's different magics. There's different gods. There's different, still gods from the pantheon, but we other than their names and passing and some flashbacks that we're privy to through Ilia, we get to see Arcadia in the war against Archimedes, the god of beasts. It's his rebellion against the gods, and we get to see that through Arcadia's eyes, and that'll be a 4-book quartet. So that's my next project that's currently underway. I'm very excited with that. It is going to be a different narrative structure. All of my books to this point, A Vengeful Realm and Ghosts of Rainia, are, you know, third person limited perspective, and there's a lot of point of views. This will be primarily Arcadia's story, so it's just her. It's first person present. It has a different tone, even though it has like a lot of the same, a lot of, you'll recognize there's like little different, you know, this is like from Rainia, this is from, you know, like Azarath. There's like little plugs to other things that exist in the world, but you don't necessarily need them to enjoy the story. You could read this and never read Ghosts of Rainia. You could read this and never read A Vengeful Realm. You could read A Vengeful Realm and never read this. So it's just, there's a sequestered element, but also there are little details and homages to one another. If you so choose to read them all, they can be read in any order. So that's fun too. But this is a story, writing in the first person is totally new. For me, it's been really fun, and I'm really excited to see how it goes. Currently, I'd say I'm about a quarter of the way through my first draft of book one, and I hope to have that. That will be certainly complete by the end of the year, the end of 2024. We'll see how the editing process goes, because first person, I have realized I'm even more long-winded than I am in third person. So that might be a good thing, it might not be a good thing, but that's what it is. So that's what's next. And then that's what's immediately next. I mentioned I have on my Patreon, The Rise of the Ram, and that's Kaelus's origin story. And that takes place after the Treaty of 940 and kind of details the 20-year period between the treaty and the events of the Scales of Balance. So I think that'll be super fun. That I'm just releasing a chapter a month. So really excited for that. And then the next thing is, you know, will I reopen A Vengeful Realm and continue the series? I am open to it. It'll probably be a time. It will not be my next project. It will not be the next. I'm going to be writing this quartet first. There is another project that may or may not be connected to. It would be connected to the creator. I'll say that.
Ooh.
Another story, another world connected to the creator that would not necessarily, but might be having overlap with the events in the world of A Vengeful Realm, and that would kind of begin with the start of Zephyrus severing the chain. And if like these two worlds almost existed on a literal scale of balance, and the chain is severed, and there's one that kind of falls and one that rises. So the world of the godless, that, like, my working title is just the godless at this point. But this godless world would potentially be something that would occur, and I would write prior to reopening A Vengeful Realm, because I do think it would feed in. But that depends. If I can't, like, if it gets too involved, it feels like a Marvel thing, and then it's like, well, you have to watch this and read that, and I feel like that's too fun. I don't like it as a consumer, so I'm not going to create in that variety either. So it'll depend how well I can stitch and knit things together, because that's really important to me, to have that cohesiveness, but also that separation of powers, so to speak, where you can read this and have a full story and not feel like, well, wait, where did that come from? Like, I don't like that. I don't like feeling like I have to read your entire catalog in order to be able to and enjoy or understand a book, or feel like I missed out because I didn't read, you know. So I don't like the I'm going to make you feel FOMO. Not my style. So that is an option. That might get pushed later, and then I, you know, do if I can come up with once again, not just there's a lot of opportunities for conflict, as we've already talked about today, but I would want to make sure I had endings that felt they were that served the reader, that served the characters, and did them all justice. And left the world still kind of oriented towards hope. I wouldn't want it to be like, well, Paxeron actually comes back and
everything
wins.
falls to shit. Bye.
Yeah. Peace. Like, yeah, that's not how this is gonna go. But it's definitely I don't like when things stay on longer than they need to. I don't like when series continue when they should have had their when they already had their ending. So if and when I come up with the new and improved ending, then I will start outlining and detailing out what that remaining story would look like. If that doesn't happen, if I feel like there's just not enough here, there's probably still I won't say short stories. I don't know if I'm capable of writing short, but I will say like limited series or limited stories based on these characters and based on the world. Yes, I definitely foresee that. Can I envision a like Zephyrus fighting through the tapestry of, you know, woven of the souls of dead gods to make it to Vicanalia? Absolutely. I think that would be a super fun story. I think like even by itself, I don't think that needs everyone else. If it that is a story I can tell, you know what I mean? Damascus, like in his exile going to Azarath, that's a story I want to tell. Daenela and Lenara going through the going through the Senate and creating political rivalries. That's a story I'd be interested to tell. And then it's just a matter of weaving all these things together and seeing like, well, how do they stack up? And if the big picture does come together in which, I can already foresee like, okay, well, if Zephyrus is trying to get to Vicanalia, how's Phoenix going to feel about that when, is he, kind of shirking his duties as a god to be with this mortal woman who's like, move on, dude. Like that's Phoenix's position on it. Like that's going to lead to some conflict. Barris's soul being dropped back into the mortal realm, and does that create a return of blood magic? Possibly. Does Vicanalia, having been a blood mage, while she was pregnant, does that impact the baby in some way? Like, oh god, I don't know, like maybe it does.
Think about that. Oh no.
Is this like so there's like so many things that I need to explore, and I hope to do that one day, but I will. My promise is that I'm not gonna churn out stories that you think you want just because they're connected to something that you already liked. If I don't, I'm not gonna write a story I don't love. And if it doesn't seem like, and I outline everything very much before it actually gets written. So if I don't feel like this is going to wrap up in not just a way, but a better way, it might never happen. It might just happen in like these little isolated, like shorter standalone novels. But yeah, I would like to thank everyone who did come today. This has been super fun for me. I hope it's been fun for you. I hope it's been interesting to hear some of these different perspectives on these characters, on these stories. If there's anything that you would like, feel free. You can email me. Once again, if you're not on my newsletter, you can go to timfacciola.com. There's a newsletter sign up at the top and the bottom. There is a double. You have to double opt in. So make sure you check your email, click yes, confirm your email, and you can stay in touch. And we're going to keep doing this. So I'll have my Discord that's getting going now, so that these kinds of things don't have to happen so isolated, and they'll be happening more often. I'm hoping to do monthly Q&As, and have spaces for people to like nerd out the way we nerded out today. So I just want to say thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy getting to write these stories, share these stories, and hear your feedback on these stories as well. So thank you very much, and hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.